Hi everyone, welcome to my session. Thank you very much for registering. This is Ariane Chapelle, and I'd like to share some insight with you on risk information and risk reporting. Now on the front page, you see my book that I hope you heard about. So this is what we will cover today. We'll cover some chapters of this book. I'll detail you that in a minute. So 3 topics for us. Everything goes in 3, easier to remember. 3 rules of insightful risk information. We'll talk about this in relation with KRI design, and I'd like to finish with the interconnectivity of risks and probably also some more insightful way of presenting your risk register. So going back to the supporting reading I mentioned, we will cover some part of the chapter here highlighted in red, chapter 14, 15, and 16, and chapter 4 on risk connectivity. I leave that to your reflection, and you can read extracts on Amazon as well. So what do we want from insightful risk information? Well, we want to get the business interested. We don't want to have this emoji face when you come to senior management or to the business lines with your risk report. How to do that? Well, in a nutshell, to engage the business with risk information, you need to be insightful, you need to be engaging, and you need to be inspiring. So in the upcoming presentation, I will detail these 3 elements, but I'll keep it short. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, if you have any compliments or insults, keep the compliment, to share, please feel free to use your chat box, and I'll receive your comments and your question, and I'll do my best to answer that as quickly as possible. So that will be true all over the sessions. In fact, insightful, you've seen that in the title, information is in deviations, don't average risks. Keep it short, because you're going to increase the chance of being read. Keep engaging by listening first, and don't confuse complexity and intelligence. The simplest you keep things, the more the chances of being understood, and therefore the more the chances of your message to be powerful. And finally, risk management is very much a doomsaying professions. People are more negative than positive. So a concept I'd like to push forward, and I'm not the only one, is the positive risk management, i.e. getting information not only from negative events, but also from positive events and positive outliers. So a bit more details on that. First of all, listen. Listen to what people want to hear before you put together reporting. And so generally, to simplify this approach, if you look at senior management, board, executive members, these are interested in the top risks that would end the business or end a mandate, actually operation risk events, and mandates of CEOs and board members a lot sooner than they end, and a lot more frequently than they end the business itself. And from business managers, well, they have cause of concerns. And these causes of concerns are potentially, and often in my experience, different than what you have in your risk register or in your risk report. So listening to what they have to say, listening to what worries them, is the first step to have a risk reporting and to collect a risk information that is relevant. And then finally, they like everyone, they have a bit of competitive nature, so their performance against peer and the comparisons between the business and across the businesses are really important. So make sure you have tally, like up-risk tally board and dashboard. Focus on what's important. We know up-risk is fat tails, so it's simple facts and simple demonstrations of that. If you go to the ORX loss report that is available freely on their website, orx.org, you can compare the histogram of the frequency of losses, operational losses. So that's the consortium. We're looking at several hundreds of operational loss data collected to ORX here. And if you look on the left-hand side, I can't show you the pointer, but the left-hand side of the histogram, the smallest losses, which are already large, I'm sure, in your company, between 20,000 euros and 50,000 euros, represent half of the frequency. So more than half of the losses collected are below 50k euros. And when you look at the severity proportion, they only represent 3% of the total severity. So 97% of the severity of the losses are in this minority of loss. And if you look at the extreme end, you have the 10 million plus that represent, you can't see on the histogram, but it's less than 0.5% of the occurrences of the frequency, but nearly 3/4 of the total severity. I really encourage you to, if you haven't done before, to do this histogram and to compare the distributions of frequency versus severity in your losses. I bet a box of champagne. You know what? I'll bet this box of champagne to your large audience today. If you find something that is strongly different in your firm, send me the proof and I'll send you the champagne. And please, if you do these stats and they resemble it, share it to everyone. It's just going to reinforce this. What is the message then? The message is don't over-control daily volatility and look for the big tickets. Look out for the risk. Look out for the risk that can derail big time. And so here I am happy to be able to share, because I had his permission, a cartoon that is published in Sam Savage's book, and Sam Savage is one of the speakers here on this Risk Awareness Week. Hi, Sam, by the way. He very graciously allowed me to reproduce that in my own book. And you see the quote, a classic example of the flow of averages involves a statistician who drowned crossing a river that was on average 3 feet deep. So that this river bed looks very much like an up-risk distribution. If you average it, you're wrong all the time and you hide your real risk information. So if we go back to typical risk data or even customer satisfaction data or whatever business data you have in your organization, this is what I mean by saying information lies in deviations. You need to look for your peaks and your drops. So this data, which is a completely simulated data that I charted on Excel very, very rapidly, it can be customer satisfaction level. And around the 0 here would be the mass of your customers that are around 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. If you average those data, you're going to have something around this flat line here. The information are in the very peaks, the customers that are very satisfied give you a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10, or the customers that are very dissatisfied and give you a 1 or 2 out of 10, okay, or here the drops. So you can look at that as the top is the better, as a one-sided data, or you can see that as deviations from the mean, and this is for a typical setting for K high alert. So this bar, the bar can be red at the top, and the best thing is being in the middle. But what I mean here is that any volatility you have in the data, you need to capture. So if these top ones are, let's say, customer satisfactions, and they're very rich in information. These are the positive outliers. That would be, for instance, your sales department that brings very happy customer. Typically, every time I ask the questions, risk managers do not collect information in the good news. They only collect information in the bad news. What I really want to attract your attention here today is move away from averages, move away from linear trends. Life is not linear. Look at the information-rich data points, which are the ones that are unusually high or unusually low, and try to get the lessons learned from the unusually low and to correct the problem. And as risk managers, you probably do that naturally, but do not forget to extract the information from the points that are unusually high. In this title, I was also mentioning concentration, and concentration is another way of looking at the deviations and deviation from the means, really. So here on this slide, I compare on the left-hand side a typical reporting you have, the average uptime, 99.7%. What does it mean? Actually, 0.3% of the time per month is 130 minutes. So potentially, you could have 139 minutes interruptions of your IT system in one go that month and still report a 99.7. Of course, if you have a 2 hours plus disruption in the system, it's going to be escalated, it's going to be reported. But by this, I want to show you that averaging your uptime is meaningless. And all the metrics that you see on the left-hand side of the graph are typical KRI metrics, or so-called KRI metrics: average 6 days, 2 days per staff, or 3 days per staff, or 5 days per staff, because that's basically the allowance that your social measures or in HR measures give you in your firm. Hides everything. Okay, where are the burnouts, or where are the long-term leaves, the 90 days plus? Okay, where are they and who are they? And these are your large concentrations of sick days. Now they can hide also the absentees, the 1 and 2 days taken out on a Mondays or Fridays, which is also a signal and a meaningful KRI. So one of the other message, the second message I'd like, well, there's 3 messages really. The first message is listen to your audience in order to design an information that they want to see. The second one is look at the positive outliers and get information from the good news. And the third one is you have probably, most certainly, and it's true for all the organizations I talk to, you have most certainly a lot of metrics that can be turned into insightful information in your firm already. You don't need to look for magic KRIs. You need to design properly the data you have. Customer complaints, okay? You have a reporting of 125 total per quarter. What does it mean? Okay, where are they? Where are they concentrated? Do you have, for instance, like I put on the right-hand side of the slides, 10% of your sales representative that concentrate 90% of your unhappy customer? Do you know it? If you don't, look for it. And if you know it, fire the sales rep, get rid of them, okay? On the other hand, if you have 15% of your sales representative or portfolio managers or relationship managers that concentrate, that only have happy customer, who are they? Look for them and drive information from these positive outliers. You as risk managers as well, that's positive risk management. Other examples, but I've given you the distribution in the ORX data, average operational loss. This is my favorite, you know. Let's say 1.2 thousand or 2.5 thousand or whatever. No, you have your max loss in operational risks, and the example here is 500,000, and you have your mass loss, the mass of your losses, when you have your immense majority, 90%, 80%, whatever, that are below, not so worrying number. You need to find a pattern here. You need to look for a pattern, but your mass of loss can be averages if you need. Third-party risk on average yellow. I'm sure Alex and others who are very acid, and rightly so to a very large extent, took the colors in risk assessment. What does it mean? It means that on average you're happy with your third-party risk. Of course, there's a weakest link, and look at your weakest link if you have one, of course. Okay. So when I tell people, or when Sam Savage or others tell people you can't use averages, usually they're quite distressed. So let me temper this talk a little bit and say, well, at the very least, you can average the mass of your distribution, so the concentrated part of your distribution. So at the very least, segregate your small losses and your large loss. Better even in 3 parts: your EL, the small things that you can ignore, the stress case, and then the worst case. But Now, another objection I hear all the time is, yes, but these small losses carry information. They do carry information when they're not random. So you do need to look for, to analyze your small loss, and data mining and machine learning that everybody talks about at the moment are potential good development and field of applications for that. By a pattern, I mean a non-random structure in your data that will signal weakness in controls or some sort of repetitive concentration, again, of causes, okay? Again, if you have questions, feel free to fire, okay? Or maybe. Now, from deviations is one thing. Another message here is information lies in the unexpected, okay, in the news. That's the idea of journalists. But from a neuroscience perspective, that's demonstrated. So here I'd like to quote two magnificent books, similar in nature, actually, but very different in their applications. The first one is from John Coates, The Hour Between Dog and Wolf. And John Coates has an interesting story. He used to be a trader for 20 years on Wall Street and noticed these irrational fear and irrational exuberance and decided to study neuroscience, and he now teaches neuroscience at Cambridge. But in his book, he gives a similar examples, not exactly the same examples, of these two text messages. Imagine, so text message on the left, you have an appointment at home with your spouse, it's 5:30, it's at 5:30, it's 6 o'clock and you haven't shown up. And so you write, hi, it's 6:30, it's 6 p.m, yes, I know, I'm late, yes, I know, I have a flat tire, okay, waiting for the repair team, I assume we'll be home around 7:30. So the two pieces of information in this text message is flat tire, home about 7:30. The other example is another book, which I love the title, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. You'll notice that the first message of my webinar here is to listen. It's an iconic book in kids' education. If you talk to your kids stating the obvious, like it's 6 o'clock, we know it's nearly bedtime, we know, we want to put your pajamas so you can get ready for bed at school tomorrow, what they're going to hear is blah, 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 blah. Okay, short messages, kids' pajama on, or lunch ready, or brush your teeth. For those of you who have kids, let's say between 4 and 12, I really advise to apply that. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because there's all chances that in your organization there are some 500 pages long risk reporting floating around with a lot of message style, very much like the bubbles you see on the left-hand side of the screen. What I would really suggest is that you stream down your reporting to the key messages, which was what I called salient reporting in operational risk, or in risk information in general. This is not specific to operational risk. This is basically data treatment. So when you report your risk register, your KRIs, your whatever, to the board or to your boss, what is the message you want to get across? Okay. What is the decision that you need, that needs to be taken? Or is it for information, or is it for action? And does it come out clearly? Okay. I do a lot of reporting redesign with firms. And my first question when I read their report is, what are you trying to say? Okay. So make sure that when you design this report, it is very much like the kids' pajama on or flat tire. Okay. Kids' pajamas on, that's the decision I want you to do. That's the actions I want you to take. Okay. Flat tire and at home about 7:30, that's the type of marginal information, specific information I want to give you. Okay, so I leave this to your reflection. Look back at your risk reporting and see on which side of the screen you're sitting. And finally, on risk reporting, feedback. Okay, a friend of mine that used to work in operational risk at BNP Paribas gave me the parallel that I've reproduced here on the slide. Asking the business to report centrally without feeding them back the result is like typing on a keyboard without a screen. Of course, you'll have typos, and of course, everyone will be discouraged to type. And so I love this parallel, and that's the slide I use with this image that you see, the keyboard without the screen, okay? So when you ask, if you work in a central risk function, when you ask the business to report upwards, everybody does that, make sure that you feed back the information. You need to feed back the risk reporting to get engagement from the business, to give value to them, because then you can play back the information. And so that will improve data quality for everyone, but it will also allow everyone to position themselves and to have the benchmark. Everybody loves benchmark. If you work in a central risk function, you have the capacity to provide benchmark to the different units in where they sit in terms of loss, of risks, of exposure, of KRI's level, of incident trends, whatever it is. So that's basically the core of the message I wanted to convey with you. Just a bit more specific examples on KRI design, even though I've touched upon the topic. What's a leading KRI? What's a preventive KRI? Well, simply, it's a metric around the risk driver. There are some risks that we understand very well. The risk of car accidents we know is aggravated both in likelihood and impact by speed or by anything that impacts vigilance, like tiredness or alcohol or medication, certain medications, etc. So this is regulated, this is measured by the speedometers, by the alcohol test, etc. So one of the aspects is to have preventive KRIs, you need to understand the causes of your events and measure the causes of your events. Okay, so hopefully pretty obvious to many of you. Now, I very much like being positive when I do risk management, because I think uplifting people is the best way to get results. So I wanted to share with you, it was not exactly in the scope, but I want to share with you a bit of a PowerPoint. So don't feel too bad about lagging KRIs. Many functions, many risk managers come to me and say, oh, we have KRIs, they're not helpful, they're lagging, they're basically the number of fraud, the number of IT disruptions, the number of the level of turnover, the level of customer service. Yes, they are lagging, but there's a more positive way to look at things. You can look at this KRI, and that's a little tag I've put on the slide. These lagging KRIs that you receive in the risk functions are actually performance indicator of the prevention that is happening, or at least should be happening in the different specific departments. So these are the squares on the screen: IT department, fraud detection, HR, etc. So don't feel too bad about having KPIs, really, that you call whatever you want. If you can call KRI, that's fine. But just make sure once in a while that these prevention and these metrics are indeed in the business. Now, most of the time they are. So there's another element that is really important in risk management, is to recycle, okay? So do not come up with new metrics. Look at what is in the business and what you can requalify or use as metrics of risk drivers, so as leading indicators. Now, this is a session on risk information and reporting. So another struggle or question I have so often is, how do you aggregate KRI? Well, it's not straightforward, because it goes back to aggregate colors. So you don't really aggregate colors. They're not continuous. They're not additive data. Are two orange better than or worse than a red? Two greens and a red, is it better than three oranges or worse, etc., etc.? Well, a few suggestions here. First of all, the aggregation rules depends on the intensity of the risk driver, so the predictability of the risks, and also on your thresholds. Basically, if your KRIs are what some organizations call critical KRIs, so sufficient conditions for incident, that's very much your weakest link. And so you have the color takes it all. So the worst color is your aggregated color. An example, again, in daily life, you don't get into the car of a drunk driver. So in project management, for instance, if you have tasks in sequence and some task is late, the rest of the project is late. So that's an easy one. If you have a critical vulnerability in your critical system in terms of information security risk, it's red. Okay. You have what you can call the index KRIs, where they equivalent in importance, and they all paint a part of the picture. That is typically what you find in profiling, in customer profiling for AML, in rogue trading profiling, in trading activities, or in terrorist profiling, or whatever, if you go outside of the financial sector. So there, it's more the global one, the majority rule work. Okay, so the index color is the one of the majority. So sorry, there's a word missing here. And then finally, I have the connected KRIs, and so that's an interesting one. It's an indicator that is reinforced by others. Okay, so it's like a compounding aspect. And the example here, the sensitive information plus hacking attempt plus repeat offending, is a slide I want to share with you. I had to redesign it, so this design is not great. I've seen that in a firm reported by the information security risk team, and I thought it was a very, very clever way of presenting things. So it's basically looking at different risk factors positioned as a Venn diagram. And so these three different diagrams were the department of that firm who had more data sensitivity than the median or the average index. So data were more sensitive in those departments. The attacks were more numerous. So this is, of course, correlated, but you have untargeted and targeted attacks. So you still have some difference in those diagrams. And then the departments where they had repeat offenders, so more than average, or more than the median, should I say. So the number of people that fail twice in a row or more the fake phishing test. And what was very worrying for that organization is that the intersections of these three diagrams was not empty. So there were places in the organization that had, at the same time, more sensitive data, more attacks, and more repeat offenders. Okay? So whether it's for information security or for other connected KRI, this is an idea I'd like to share with you, is to represent your indicators in a very visual way. Or if you don't want to aggregate, you don't. And you have what I've named candle reporting. You have the example of the article there that was published on RiskNet, Make Your Cake and Eat It. So a lot of people downloaded the article because there was a cupcake in front, but these were the candles that would go on the reporting cake. I'll show you in a minute. So these candles are, simple bar charts with the red on top. It can be a set of indicators. It can be a set of risk assessment results. It can be whatever it is. The condition, though, is that these metrics are of the same importance. It's like an index reporting, usually. But it allows you to report a distribution of events of different intensity. Now, it can be colors, it can be something else, in an aggregate, in a synthetic way, without crunching it into misleading averages. So here you have three sets of indicators, and the riskiest one is the one with the longer the flame, the higher the danger, so the first candle. And I told you there was a cake going with the candle, and so that's the reporting cake. Now, it's not a real name. I like tiered cake, so that's why I named it like that. But this is a way to slice information upwards that has been shared with me by some tier 1 bank in the UK several years ago, and basically reflects the general practice. So in terms of information, volumes of information that you report at risk management and middle management level, it's all you need to know to monitor. So there's very little difference between monitoring and reporting. But when you get to senior management or department heads, it needs to drive action. So just like the salient reporting I was mentioning to you, what is the type of informed actions you want to drive from your reporting. And then when you're at executive committee level or even at board level, is what is the decision that needs to be taken. And so how you slim down and focus your reporting on the decisions that need to be made. And finally, on these structure of reporting, it's a different way of saying the same thing about averaging. Escalate rather than aggregate when you have red risks or red KRIs or red exposure or threshold breach, whatever types of alerts, however you want to name them, rather than mixing them. So report all your greens separately and all your yellow separately. Otherwise, you're going to dilute and everything will be pale orange. So that's basically a number of things I wanted to tell you on reporting. Listen, be positive, extract information from positive outliers, do not average your risks, and design your KRIs around concentrations and deviations. So that's the main topic. My third and last topic is another way also. It's in this idea of presenting information in a way that is a bit more insightful and also a bit more informative. And I've been very lucky to attend a presentation many years ago already, organized by the Institute of Risk Management by Systemic Consult. You see the little tag, and I'm grateful to Neil Allen to also allow me to reproduce his work. And this was a joint presentation with Rio Tinto, the mining company, and this company that was developing software to represent the interrelations between risks. And what happened to Rio Tinto is that they had a risk register with the risks listed one after the other, like many of us have. And they had a small incidence. That's the one, a small risk in their risk register. That's the one circled in red. They had an incident there, and what they had failed to ascertain is, or to assess, is that this incident was connected to a very large cluster of risk, of much larger risks, and they ended up with an impact that was a lot worse than anticipated. So from then on, they moved to a connectivity graph, so analyzing essentially on expert judgment, but I really hope that, again, data mining, machine learning, to some extent, I don't like to say artificial intelligence, but let's say machine learning will help us, give us insights, or rather a more reliable information on the dependencies between risks. But before you get to that, you can very much do that from an expert judgment. I'll give you another example in a minute. But the idea is to manage your set of non-financial risk, just like you would manage your set of risky assets, financial risky assets. If you have a set of a bond of credits, a bond of equities or bonds, you're going to look at the correlations. It's the correlations between those assets that drive the risk of your portfolio. Arguably, it's the same for non-financial risk, but it's largely overlooked. Also largely because of lack of data. But even without the lack of data, you can use your experience and your knowledge in operation risk. And so this is my last example. Again, I've done a paper on this. There's a blog on LinkedIn on this. And I don't know if there's a blog on my website. It's definitely in the book. So what I do every year when RiskNet publish their top risks, I do a commenting article. And in 2017, you have the list here. We had cyber, that's number one forever, regulation, outsourcing jumped up, geopolitical risk jumped up. Now you have to remember that 2017 was it was the year just after the Brexit referendum and after the US election. So that was high in the agenda, and then conduct risk. And you see this list like everyone else. What you don't see is the connections between those risks. So don't look at the color code, by the way. There's no color code. It's just a PowerPoint default colors, because I don't spend much time in design. I spend a lot more time in risk management. But the narrative here is if you want to put your risks in chain of cause and consequences, it starts with your external events, with a change in your environment. Environment KRAs are good KRAs also, by the way. Geopolitical risk, that was Brexit and Trump, basically. Brexit triggers, or was anticipated to trigger, and it did, organizational changes, because you had companies opening branches on the continent and while keeping a presence in the UK. Organizational change changes your outsourcing risk, because you have different third parties. Different third parties hold different sets of your data. So that changes your cyber risks and data security, at least data security risks. Geopolitical risk meant also more international tension, which changes the risk of physical attacks. If you have physical attacks and you're bombed in your server room, doesn't help or change the risk of your IT failure. If you have an IT disruption, you're going to be more vulnerable to cyber attack. And whether you believe my experience or intuitions or not, although the facts have proven that quite right 2 years or 3 years on, it doesn't matter. The point is, if you organize your risks in network, you can prioritize your mitigation and you can see the chain of cause and consequences. And so on the other left-hand side of the screen, you have your clustered conduct, AML, regulation, fraud, etc. that needs to be managed accordingly as well. So a very simple example, but how to turn and organize your risk in a more insightful way. Again, if you have questions or comments, absolutely, please feel free to share, and it will be for the benefit of everybody. I'm going to leave you with a final quote of the great Richard Feynman, who was a physicist, a theoretical physicist, but very famous for explaining himself in simple terms and engaging terms. If you cannot explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it. So 2 messages that I would like to reinforce based on that. Make sure you, as a risk manager, can explain whatever you're doing in simple terms. If you can't, revisit your understanding. But conversely, and if there are internal auditors or anyone amongst the audience, conversely, when you audit or when you investigate a department and people cannot provide you answers in simple terms of what it is that they're doing or what their exposures are, what their controls are, it's probably because they don't understand it enough, and then you have a reason for worry. So I'll finish on that. Do not confuse complexity and intelligence, and don't confuse simplicity and idiocy. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to hear your feedback. Thank you.